And welcome back to Happy Hour again. I am Curtis Taylor. I'm here with Jason Hendrick today. Hello, Jason.
Hey, Curtis, I feel like we're a wobbly bar stool right now. We're missing one of our legs, Joby Yobi.
That's right. I kind of feel the same way. When you said wobbly bar stool, it made me think of those ones that have like the one leg where you're supposed to like kind of prop it up underneath you and sit. I never. It,
Yeah, no, those make me nervous. As going into the show tonight without, or today, technically without one of our co-hosts. This is a special daytime edition again of Happy Hour again. Um, what's happening and why we're doing a little daytime, and fortunately why Joby can't join us. We've been having a really awesome kind of impromptu, not impromptu is not the right word. It's an unscheduled or unmarketed author series that we've been doing with the Happy Hour Again show, where we bring in some really great authors that are writing about either the history of beer and as it relates to your life, our lives, not mine specifically, but as people, but also thinking about beer styles and how it's brewed and the history of where different beer has come from. And today we're continuing that. The challenge that we run into, though, is that a lot of these authors, for whatever reason, are not in the West Coast time zone. And yeah, they're more back east, either Midwest or even further, and they need some accommodations.
right.
You know, it's not easy to show at 10:30 at night
Uh,
and last for an hour straight through.
Absolutely, and I think too that it's growing pains for us as our base starts to widen out of the people who we're reaching out to and having as guests on the show, that we have these things that we're like, oh yeah, wait a second, it it's much later there. But I always think of West Coast or East Coast time zone people. And Jason, I don't know if you get this or not, but when I was in New York, and I've only been there once, but general and people on the East Coast seem to stay up much later than we do. Their news starts at 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night, and then it's like, okay, now let's go to dinner. And I'm my mind is always blown as to how people can still be up that late and ready to go around.
Well, as a playful jest, Curtis, and a great friend of mine, we do recognize though that you go to bed pretty early anyway, and you get up super early. So it may just be your personal discrepancy versus everyone else's. However,
Fair enough.
I can appreciate what you're saying. You know, growing up in Indiana, there was an aspect of the evening really starting for some reason like 7:30, 8:30 at night, and that just isn't conducive again for the way we have our show formatted. But I look at it as an opportunity and a positive, because the hope and the plan is that at some point we're doing shows all different times of the day and many days a month. I would like to get this show up and running, and it's going to take our audience's help to continue to spread the word about what Happy Hour Again is doing. For a little shameless self plug right there. But I'm looking forward to the day that we've got many guests lined up, or many topics, to the point where we may be doing 2 or 3 or 4 shows a week, where the timing may just vary. And we also know that it's hard for us to stay up late also. I mean, when it comes to our normal shows at 7:30 Pacific time, by 9 o'clock, you can feel the fade a little bit, right? As we
Right.
start getting into the last call, it's truly last call.
Right. Yeah, and those nights, a lot of times I'm not heading to bed until close to 11, and I'm sure you all aren't either, but just because then I'm trying to make sure that the last download has been made and the last redundant copy is there, so that when I wake up the next morning, I don't wake up to an empty computer and no audio or no video as we go through there. So I usually, but it works out, because then I can hydrate before I go to bed. And generally Tuesday mornings I wake up, I might be a little tired, but no more worse for wear.
So, shifting gears and thinking about the impact to our lives and our sleep patterns, can we talk a little bit? I feel like I'm looking it up right now. I should have looked it up ahead of the show. I should have been prepared. Preparation is, 9/10 of success. But did you feel an earthquake last night, or slash this morning?
Oh shit, Jason, I can't believe you're bringing this up, because I had an earthquake dream. And I'm like, wait a second.
I was dreaming, and I felt it was not just an earthquake dream. I felt an earthquake. And at this point, I've lived in California long enough that I was like, I felt the vibration enough to wake me up for some reason because it was close enough to the get up time anyway. But yeah, I know that
I to-
something was rumbling.
I totally forgot about that, but I do remember I was I was in a 3-story building, I think, and I was going to try and get out, and the person's like, "No, don't go downstairs." I'm like, "What? You think it's going to be safer on the 3rd floor?" Like, okay, that I guess
Don't go
I guess less stuff is going
downstairs.
to drop on me, but now I just it's like all of a
Awesome.
sudden just came boom flooding back to me. Whoa!
I'm looking on the website though, and I
And there's
sadly
nothing.
don't.
Where do you
There's
look?
nothing.
Which
What?
what do you do? Do you just Google SoCal earthquake,
Yeah,
or
because
where do you
they've
go?
got a Caltech education. Caltech has a website, the Earthquake Data
Hmm.
Center, and that's usually where I find what I need. But
Well,
maybe
there
I'm
was a
mistaken. Maybe
yeah,
maybe you and I had a shared dream.
that's pretty awesome. There was a 3.0 at 10 o'clock, well, almost 11 o'clock, way out. Oh, wow, closer to San Bernardino than anything, really. Yeah, I don't see one either. But totally had that dream. That's wild. Wonder what it
Well, let's
was.
look at earthquake. Earthquake.
The
Earthquake.
Earthquackers.
No, 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 no. Wait, here we go. 2.0 magnitude, about 8 hours ago, Ventura, California. It's got a little pink bubble next
Okay.
to it. So let's check on that one because I know that there was something going on. Yep, there it is.
All
There it is.
right.
It was about 6:30 a.m. and that would be about right.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out when it was that when that if that's what woke me up. Well, if it's at 6:30, I was well awake. I'd been up since 4. So that might not have been.
But
That might not have
in
been.
fairness, maybe it was one of these other ones because there were some other see 12 hours ago, 13 hours ago in Shandon and Huron, there was a couple other earthquakes. So maybe we're just feeling some ripples up and down the coast, which would not be unheard of.
Maybe. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Generally, those kinds of things um, make it into your dreams. I mean, the ones that we've felt have all been fairly mild. So you go, oh, there it is, and then I always find myself bracing, like, okay, you pause for a second or two, and then it passes, and you think,
Yeah.
okay, can I exhale yet? Okay.
So I'm notorious. I'm gonna be the old dad and grandpa that tells the stories over and over again. I have a faith based on like just being the guy who usually repels against that. I'm usually the person in my mind going, "Oh God, haven't we heard this story already from other people?" Which means by default, I'm going to be that guy. And right now, I'm having one of those moments of deja vu because I feel like I've told you and Joby before about my very significant and frightening earthquake dream when I was in college, and the structure, both literal and metaphorically, was that in my fraternity, I lived under a false floor. So we built our side room in the fraternity as such that my buddy was in a loft above the door, and then I was under this false platform. And on top of that platform was his desk and our futon and whatnot. So I kind of lived in a cave. I had a little bookshelf in there and some like white Christmas lighting to make it like ambiance. I had all this stuff in there, my laptop and everything. It was like a little tiny rat-sized apartment. But there was one night that, for whatever reason, the shelving above the platform where he had my buddy and roommate had all his textbooks and notebooks and everything stored, the bracket gave way. It finally came out of the plaster, and that thing came crashing down on top of the platform. Well, I was still largely asleep, and all that I knew was the crashing.
Right.
And without it woke me up, but it wasn't such that I was coherent about what was happening. All I knew that there was a loud banging sound coming down on top of me, so I immediately crunched, like, "Oh my god, something's falling on me," because I felt like the platform in the house was collapsing on top of me, kind of like you know any number of post-apocalyptic movies or you know earthquake movies where people get trapped under rubble. And so I curled up like a cockroach into a little ball, and it's like one of those where I start peeking with one eye, like nothing's on top of me. What happened? And I kind of slowly emerged from my crouch and looked around and realized, oh, it's just a bunch of books and debris on top of the platform. But it was so vivid and real in that moment that
Right.
I literally felt like I was going to be trapped under some kind of building structure.
Yeah, especially when you're fast asleep and everything else is catches you by surprise like that. Big noise, definitely.
But I find it wild when your dreams or the imagery in your mind is so vivid. There's one thing to be like, oh yeah, I remembered my dream. There's another thing for it to be so vivid that you feel like you're physically part of it and not actually sleeping.
Well, and I think that's why I feel like that it had to have been an actual earthquake, because I remember feeling off balance like you do when something rolls underneath you, and that
Yep.
when the building actually fell over, but I was able to do some sort of, I don't even, video game sort of,
Some kind of Matrix move.
yeah, some sort of video game run up the side of the wall kind of thing, and
Nice.
it was, yeah, that was pretty wild. Whoa. Well, that's interesting. We'll keep searching on
Yep.
that for anyone who is maybe watching right now. Let us know what's happening. Like, did you feel that earthquake too?
Yeah,
And
or let us know your crazy earthquake stories. Maybe we'll have a discussion. SoCal disasters on Happy Hour again someday.
yeah, there's plenty of them floating around here. Definitely. Well, we've got just
I
a
feel like
couple.
you're alluding to something else, Curtis.
Right. Well, we've got a few minutes here before we intro our guests for this afternoon and evening or morning, whenever you're listening to this podcast, the recording of it. Stan Hieronymus, author. He's got. I'm looking at his website right now, AppalachianBeer.com, and that's in
And
like,
we've got his book right here,
there
Brew
it
Like
is,
a Monk.
fabulous. Brew Like a Monk. So he's got Brewing Local, For the Love of Hops, Brew with Wheat, and Brew Like a Monk. Those are the 4 books that he's written right now. They're technical brewing kinds of books. And then his website, Appalachian Beer. I'm trying to not say Appalachians because it's like Appalachian.
I know. I was
like,
thinking, like, is it mountains? Are
no,
we
and I'm
talking
and I
about
and I'm and
areas of geographic areas?
yeah, so in the same way that Chianti can only come from that one region, and Champagne can only come from there, and Brunello is this only thing, he started writing about beer as in, does the terroir or the locations make a difference? And so that's why
So you're not talking about the mountains, the Appalachians.
no, not the banjo playing sort of hillbilly.
Well, I did grow up calling them the Appalachians, so that's
Right.
why I was trying to verify in my mind.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Right. No, talking about
They weren't brewing beer back in those mountains either. They were doing some moonshine,
some shine.
corn
That's right.
still.
So say the word for me, Jason, so that I can get it, because I don't feel like I'm saying it right.
No, I think you're describing it right. I think Appalachians, in terms of the like designated regions where
Right.
certain things grow and but the mountains, just for differentiation, we'll call it Appalachians.
We'll smooth off that A there just a little bit.
Yeah,
We'll draw it out.
or maybe even like many beers in when we're sitting in the bar stool going, you remember that time we hiked in the Appalachians?
That's what it sounds like. That would be me after moonshine right there. I have a feeling.
Yes, sir.
All right, so
As
anyway,
you said, when we come back, we're going to be talking to Stan Hieronymus, and just one more flash of the book before he comes back on. What we're talking about today is his book, Brew Like a Monk, right here in front of my face.
yep, that's going to get us kicked off, and then who knows where this is going. When I prepped him for this interview, I said, we're going to start there, but we're all beer geeks, so who the hell knows where this conversation is going to go?
I know, because I'm looking forward to talking about candy sugar and some of the
Ooh, nice.
components that are going in.
Right.
I see one of your tabs and I drew right into it. I'm like, candy sugar versus brown sugar. You know what? I just like sugar.
Yeah,
so let's figure out what that means here.
Yeah, that was a fascinating. When you asked me what the tabs mean, or do I want to see photos of it? I'm like, no, I don't think so. I think that was just all from my homebrewing days, trying to figure out what candy sugar was, what inverted sugar is, what brown sugar is, all of that. And it all tastes different, and it all adds a little bit of difference to it. So we'll come back in just a few minutes with Stan Hieronymus.
It's refreshment time, and our refreshment stand is loaded with good things to eat. There's crispy, crunchy popcorn, and hot, delicious buttered popcorn. lots of candy, and frosty, refreshing cold drinks. Why not treat yourself at the Refreshment Center now? As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.
Hurry, hurry, step right this way, folks, for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, taste-tempting candies of finest quality. Enjoy popcorn, exploded into tender, delicious, crispy bites of crunchy goodness. Enjoy the tops in cool, refreshing soft drinks. If you want to enjoy some refreshments, this is your opportunity. There will now be a short intermission.
10, 9, 8, 7 minutes to go.
Hey, Mom. Yes, you. Why fuss and fret about dinner? Why not have it right here? Yes, this drive-in offers everyone in the family a real picnic treat for dinner. We've got delicious sandwiches with all the trimmings and your other dinner favorites, plus whatever you want to drink, hot or cold. Come early before the show starts, or eat while you're being entertained, or at intermission time. So why fuss? Give your family a tasty dinner at this drive-in.
What is it? Hey, why, it's Buttercup. Popcorn, add some butter to hot popcorn. Mix it up, wrap it up, Buttercup is born.
It's delicious.
So nutritious.
It's a taste delight.
It's so munchy,
Crisp and crunchy.
you'll enjoy each bite. Eat butter-drenched Buttercup, popcorn at its best.
Served in a king-size cup.
It beats all the rest.
Show starts in 6 minutes.
Time for refreshment. Refreshment. For your enjoyment, there's hot, fresh popcorn, tempting, delicious hot dogs, and so many kinds of ice cream. And, of course, sparkling, delicious, ice-cold Coca-Cola for everybody at the refreshment counter now. Remember, your favorite snack will taste especially good with world...
Hello and welcome to Happy Hour again. I am Curtis Taylor. I'm here with my co-host today, Jason Hendrick, and it is my pleasure to introduce Stan Hieronymus. Welcome to the show, Stan.
Thanks for having me on.
It's our pleasure. So just to lay a footprint out in front of us, I became aware of you, Stan. I'm trying to think. Maybe Jason has the copy of my book, and my mother gave that to me for Christmas in 2005. When
I'm so glad you set yourself up for this, Curtis. Yep, because that is when the book was purchased. Right here,
All right.
It is distinctly insigniated and signed. Love, Mom and Dad, but it says Kurt, eat, drinketh, and be merry. So I've never heard you called Kurt before, and the fact they use the word drinketh, it just puts it right up there and puts a smile on my face.
Right. I mean, and because I'm trying to think. So I was in my 30s, certainly, but it's my mother still gives me books and likes to sign them so that we know what year we got the books. Anyway,
Great.
Stan, I'm so excited to have you on, one, because at that point in my life, I was like I think a lot of beer drinkers who are experimenting. Belgian beers just kind of blows open the world, right? And all of a sudden, these flavor profiles that you've never thought could be in a beer are all of a sudden there. So let's just start with, how is it that that you discovered Belgian beer?
Well, I guess it's a little bit earlier in the 80s when we started exploring more beers, and there were a few Belgian beers imported, and they were always interesting. And generally what was being imported was only the best that was there. You didn't get duds along the way. It's just a weaning process. Merchant de Vin was and working with Michael Jackson was at the forefront. So it really helped when you had one. You go, if you like those styles, of course, then you go, oh yeah, this is really well made. And then home brewing that made them interesting as well. So jump ahead now till like the late 90s and into the aughts. And Ray Daniels, who had written Designing Great Beers, became the publisher of Brewers Publications. And we had lived in Illinois when he was working on Designing Great Beers. We had since moved into Mexico. And because I wrote about beer, and by then Daria and I had done the 2 guides to pubs and breweries around the United States, cookbook for Time Life. He had an informal advisory committee for Brewers Publications. And we talked about what were the holes that needed to be filled. And I would always point out to him that he didn't write about Belgian beers in Designing Great Beers. It's mostly beers of German or British heritage, and of course what started in the U.S. And we go, that's a niche that needs to be filled. And about that time, Phil Markowski, who at the time was at Southampton Public House on Long Island, he's now at Two Roads in Connecticut, and he was a Belgian beer enthusiast. He traveled to Belgium, and he proposed a really broad book of all Belgian beers in one book. You know, really from the viewpoint of a brewer who liked making those beers. And you know, I think Ray, being practical, looked at it and said it'd be years, because he was also pretty busy as a brewer, and suggested breaking it into 3 different beers, three different books. One of which was Saison book, Farmhouse Ales, which that's what Phil did. One would be the Abbey beers, and one would be sours. So Jeff Sparrow did the sour book, and Tommy Arthur, then at just Pete'sport, you know, the brew pubs, was going to do the Abbey beers. And in 2004, Tommy realized that he really didn't have time to do that. At that point, they're starting to cook the idea that they're going to start Lost Abbey, and which is also Port Brewing now, and Tiny Bubbles, all of these brands. They weren't all going to happen at that time, but they knew they'd make hoppy beers, and they knew he wanted to make barrel-aged beers. And Ray called me up and said, Tommy's not going to be able to do this. And I thought he was looking for suggestion for another brewer to write the book. And I ran through some ideas, and I said, like, Rob Todd, he's, you know, his white was well established by then. He made a nice double, an occasional triple. I said, well, there's one possibility, but I don't know that he would have the time, and he'd be able to, I don't know anything about his writing. And well, Ray says to me, he said, I thought you'd want to write it. And I said, because I kept telling him that you need this for the book, not that I felt that I had explored enough, and not that I'd ever thought I'd be writing something technical for brewers, home brewers, and also commercial brewers. And this is the part of the story where I always get in trouble, and particularly when it shows up in a tweet when I tell it, because I also point out that I was never going to write anything for homebrewers, because homebrewers are assholes. They think they know more than you. And I can say this because I'm a homebrewer. I criticize everybody else's stuff.
Tweet.
I like that you threw that in there, though, Stan, because there's 2 things that ran through my mind. There was this vision of the person at the office going, you know what we really need right now? We need a new copy machine. And a week later, someone going, wait, I thought you were trying to research getting a new copy machine. You're like, no, I just wanted to present the idea, you know, like, I just think we need one. And then also you'd mentioned early in your opening about home brewing being a component. So please, let's not lose sight. I want to learn a little bit about your experience as a home brewer and whether or not the Belgian side was intimidating. But continue, because I want to hear why homebrewers are potentially assholes and how it translates.
I wasn't. And so anyway, I hung up the phone, and in my office was off in the corner of their house, and I walk out to. We had a great room, and my wife's in the kitchen. Monk brews, maybe. And my wife looked at me, and she said, "This means we get to go to Belgium, right?" And I thought, okay, yeah. I'm going to have to go call him back. and I gave it some thought and came up with a name, for instance, and the approach to it as well, which Brew Like a Monk is really, except narrowed down, certainly on the designing great beers model. And I think farmhouse ales is to an extent, but Brew Like a Monk, while the going to the breweries and the history, because you don't have to cover the whole world. It's basically defined. At the time, there were 6 authorized Abbey breweries, that's because La Trappe, there were some issues about if they were totally in charge of their beer. Mm-hmm. So they were out of the association for a while. Then they came back in, and of course now you've added Trappist monasteries, and other countries has also got the stamp, so they can stamp their beer Trappist. So it is pretty easy to visit those 6, and then some others in Belgium, and write it off of that. So that became the premise, and that's why I did the book.
Well, the
touching on that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Curtis.
Well, I was just saying that that the people that you were involved with on this too are these, like the who's who of brewing. I mean, Jason may not be familiar with Ray Daniels, but that was the first technical homebrew book that I got after Brewing for Dummies, I think. And then and that just opened it up. But the 2 books that you were talking about are on my shelf back here too. The wild, farmhouse ales and what is the wild one? Wild ales? Is that
Wild Brews?
Wild Brews. But, and then, like Tommy and all these other names that we as brewers or beer geeks, we all know all these names, and kind of coming together for that is pretty fantastic that there was, just that there's this community of all of you that are bouncing these ideas off of each other. And Jason, I interrupted you. What was it?
No. I was just we're on a similar train of thought. I was going to ask about kind of what the prowess was of the different individuals, and how each kind of large category of beer was really defined for that person. Because you made reference, Stan, about not necessarily feeling you were versed enough or done enough travel to write about Abbeys and the Trappist ales. Do the other gentlemen have a strong expertise in their particular segment? They strong sour knowledge.
Yeah, well, Phil went to Belgium fairly often. By then, he won a gold medal at GABF for Saison, although there was no Saison category. So I think it was under experimental beer. So, I mean, he'd been brewing a long time, experienced new things. And he'd been to, he helped me out with some things with St. Bernardus, for instance, because he'd been there and taken some notes. And Jeff was really gung-ho into the Lambics and other Flanders Red and other sour beers and the process and
Got it.
And stuff like that. So you could pursue it. And then, of course, for me, I guess the lucky break was I contacted the 6 monastery breweries and told them I wanted to come visit, get the background. And, even though people were telling me, they're really secretive, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to tell you about how they do it or anything like that, or let you in. Well, this case, even though this is 2004 at the time I'm contacting them, I wrote them letters, like through the mail. Um, and mailed it to him, and I explained that my interest was as much, why they brewed and the history of the brewery, what makes them different. Talking about Saint Benedict, obviously, and the rule of Saint Benedict, which is that they have to earn a living working with their hands, and working with their hands to serve each other as well within the brewery, within the monastery. And so, for whatever the reason, I heard back from them. And then also a couple of cases. So I didn't write Westmalle. Westmalle was imported by Merchant of Inn, so they helped me set up visiting Westmalle. But the two ones that people said are going to be the toughest for you are Rochefort and West Flat Run. And both of those cases, it was the letters, and then they emailed me back. They didn't write me back. I gave my email address, and they wrote me back and said, "Sure, show up this time, and we'll do this." And then I went there, and I asked them questions about, they wouldn't give me the exact recipe, but they would tell me, where they were, basically a good idea of their malt bill, what they were using for hops, the origin of all their yeast, and then they would talk about their mash schedule, their pitching temperatures, their targeting of CO2 in the bottle, and these are all obviously useful details. So, for instance, and those details weren't, they were a lesser extent in farmhouse ales, for instance. And, Jeff really didn't have a source to get those for wild brews. So people go, "Man, it's great you got that. And how'd you peel that out of them?" And all I did is ask them questions, and they answered the questions. There was no other magic aspect of it.
And I think looking at that list again, those 6 that we're highlighting or talking about right now from the book would be Akel, Chimay, Roquefort, Orval, Westmalle, and West Fleteren. Going into this project, Stan, what was your level of appreciation for the Abbey ales, the Trappist ales, or what was your knowledge base? Is that a beer that you typically rotated into your consumption?
Well, they're, for instance, I'm not sure I'd had any Ockel beers at the time, because they were, they were not widely distributed in the U.S. Shelton Brothers brought them in, and I think they sent me some Ockel beers. But before I went to Belgium, as a matter of fact, we'd been studying for it was a group study group with the Dukes of Ale, which are the Albuquerque Homebrew Club. So in studying during the course of the studying, because we started like in January and took the test like in August. But for our blowout party, which a lot of people were in Bay, it was that we did that on a Friday night, maybe before our awards ceremony, on Saturday or Saturday night before our awards ceremony. We camped out, and our blowout party was, we just got every Belgian beer we could get shipped to us and our hands on it and stuff like that, which is why some people did not make it to the award ceremony at 3:00 the next afternoon.
That's an easy thing to happen, especially when you're tasting 7, 8, 9% beers.
And even for us, so we lived at 5,200 feet, but this particular party was at about 7,500 to 8,000 feet. So we decided, let's throw in some altitude as well.
Yeah, if the alcohol isn't going to do us, let's put another 1,000 feet into there, and let's see how everyone does. Yeah. Well, what I'm just thinking about ingredients with this, and as you're going through this, I'm just thinking about if there were any ingredients that you learned about that were just, wait, you're doing what with what? Were there any of those kinds of moments?
and this is true, often true at the commercial level, that they are simpler than homebrewers would do it. So at national, basically what's now HomebrewCon, at NHC in 2006. That's when the book had come out in 2005, and this was in Florida. So I was judging whatever, it was category 18 at the time. It's no longer category 18. So you had 18A was like Belgian blondes, and then B was doubles, and you had Saison and Beer de Garde were in there. No, they were a separate category. So it's A, B, C. Anyway, you got strong golden and strong dark.
Mm-hmm.
And the winning strong dark beer that I judged was Jamil Sanatoff. Which we didn't know it was his beer at the time. But then when they announced the award, and I sent him an email, I said, I'd like to get your recipe. And the recipe, which I'm trying to think where I probably got it in my blog. It's got like 8-9 different grains. It's got everything in it. It's got 3 different dark grains and special, really, keeping it simple, where you can get by with a minimum number of grains, and you get incredible complexity. And part of that is you're getting a lot of alcohol, so that adds some complexity, and you're able to get that alcohol and still have a nice drinkable beer through the use of sugar. So that was one part of it. And then obviously your yeast selection, and you're striking the right partnership with your yeast. You understand what it wants in order to provide a beer that is, ultimately what your target is. Not that you are training the yeast, that you're understanding the yeast and giving it the nutrients it wants at the time, operating at the temperature it wants to operate at.
What you're describing feels very in line with kind of the German philosophy, though, as well. Like, take the bare minimum number of ingredients required to get this beverage produced, and really work with what is being provided characteristically of those ingredients, versus shoving a bunch of things into a pot and hoping it works out. Just like we tease sometimes with the IPA makers, that you could take a bad beer and shove crap loads of hops in there and come up with something drinkable. The opposite is really what you're working with in terms of the beers you're describing, and the German philosophy too. Like, you've got to have some skill and some focus on getting the best out of those ingredients, not putting more ingredients and hoping it works.
Well, when I was working on the wheat book, which was next, and talking to a brewer in the south of Bavaria about his Weizen beer, and then of course, like everybody in Germany, he's a trained brewmaster. He's got a certificate. He didn't learn his own brew. And he's saying, part of the brewer's skill is some years you get shit ingredients and you still have to make a good beer out of it. You got to work with those. And that was a bit of an overstatement. His malt and his wheat are a little bit better than that. But a key player in those, again, they are yeast driven beers. So there's a lot of similarity between the Weizen beers of the south of Germany and the Trappist and Abbey beers, and that's because the yeast are so similar.
Jason and I, before we came on to this afternoon, we're talking about candy sugar, and so Jason has my copy, and he was, I'm trying to think, it was a few hours ago, he said, do you want photos of all the dog ears that you have in this? And I was like, no, I don't think so, because I think that was all from my home. Right. The book ends up being about twice as thick because I'm dog earing every other page, right? But but one of them was candy sugar. So Jason, take it from there, because you had a particular response to that reaction.
Yeah, because I was, thinking about the beers that I've had, because I had a great opportunity years ago to do like a little Europe travel, was fluttering. It's super hard. Europe, I'm like, we got to stay close to the border. And thankfully, we were up on the northern part of France, and we took a day drive over to Bruges. And the only reason we ended up at Bruges is because we were 45 minutes into West Vleteren, and I thought there's nothing else around here. We might as well go another 45 minutes into Bruges and spend the day. But those styles, even you mentioned blondes, and the doubles are a little lighter as well, but most of those beers for me are a little more viscous. They do have that sugary component to it. And, looking through the book and reading about the different sugars that are being leveraged, there are numerous types of sugars that you could put into a beer. And I was just curious, because I find that candy sugar was often a nice marketing word or a phrase on labels, brewed with candied sugar. And so could you touch a little bit on how those sugars are leveraged in the beer making process and in these Abbey ales, and why candy sugar is something that a lot of people look for?
Well, first of all, in the introduction of the book, I actually say there is no I in sugar, to discourage people from using the term candy sugar, which is spelled with an I.
Right.
And that's because so this is in the aughts, like in 4 and 5. If you went into a homebrew shop, and whether you were getting a pale candy sugar, or what they call candy sugar, or dark candy sugar, you were just getting sugar turned into cubes. There was not the one was sort of like brown sugar turned into a cube. It was not the same thing they're using in Belgium. And what particularly in those, so in the pale beers, they're basically using sacks of sucrose. It's just to lighten the fermentation. You don't want to get anything from the sugar. What it's doing is you're basically creating alcohol as clean as you can. And that's a lesson that then also in the aughts, as American brewers want to start making double IPAs that were not barley wines. And so the double IPA style doesn't become a style at GABF until 2003. And then by then it was supplementally in the BJCP style guidelines, but I think that was like then written in like maybe 2005. But that's sort of an aside. So that was from the pale thing, that you're just going for good, clean fermentation. But earlier, particularly when people didn't have maybe because they didn't have as good quality malt, back in the 80s and 90s, craft brewers and home brewers were spooked off of using sugar that way. So you needed this sort of magic. Oh, we don't just use sugar. We're using these cubes, this candy sugar, which is the same goddamn stuff. That's not what they were using in Europe. And of course, the key one there was the dark sugar. So again, at Rochefort, when I asked them, at West Vleteren, they did not speak openly about what they were using for. They would not even say they were using sugar. But I'm there. I'm looking at sacks of sugar, so I could figure that out. But at Rochefort, Gumar Santos, who's the brewing engineer in charge of brewing, is going, this is what we use. And you got the name of it, and you look it up, and you realize they're using confectionery sugar. And that was made, and that was called candy with an I syrup, not sugar. So they were using this syrup. And at the time, and he ends up bringing in this confectionery syrup, and that becomes the dark syrup, which you can get D, whatever, all these different numbers. So that's not in the book. So that if people go, there are not many changes I would need to make in the book. But one of them would be that now, instead of having a recipe to make your own syrup, which I really don't recommend trying to do if you live a mile high, because it's making any candy on a stove when you get at higher altitude is very difficult. And that recipe came from Andy Mosher, as a matter of fact. I could just say you can go out and get this syrup from him. So that goes back to, and that is a factor in the complexity, but it's also still that clean, keep the body a relatively, certainly a lower finishing gravity than you were getting in other strong beers you could get at the time, and anything like a Doppelbock or a barley wine or something like that. So that's what the sugar element gives. In the case of the dark syrup, it's also adding that complex flavor. Again, it's with a higher alcohol and the contribution of the yeast. There's all the factors. There's an aroma flavor matrix there.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you're right, I mean, that's just that there's no body.
You're able to get it. Yeah, you get the alcohol, which is part of it.
Right.
And the sugar is a nice, easy way to get there. So and I'm trying to think, so Sam Adams did, I guess it was the Millennium. I think they called it Millennium, but was that really and no, it wasn't in 2000. They did that later than that. Right. Anyway, they did a collaboration with Weinstefan to do a very strong wheat beer without using sugar. And so they did this insane level of decoctions. So it was possible to say it's going to be Reinheitsgebot. And I talked so one of the brewers who worked on that grew up on a hop farm. So his brother remained and runs the hop farm. He became a brewer. And he was, at the time, doing, I don't know if it was an apprenticeship or whatever at Weinstefan. And so he had to work on this beer and all these levels of multiple hours and things like that in order to, which you can go through that process and create these sugars in order to keep. And he's gone, that was just stupid. It was such a pain in the butt. But they said, so the early 20th century in order to compete with stronger alcohol drinks.
And I think there's that interesting confluence too of all of those factors coming together. So you have the candy sugar, so there's a light body. Then you have the high carbonation, and then you have the spicing, the spice profiles from the yeast, and it all so then it's light and it's bubbly, and then there's these spices, but then there's also a residual sweetness on the backside. So it's just you take that drink and then it washes off, and then for me anyway, I don't want to speak for you two, but I want to take another drink right away just because I want to replenish all of those flavors again.
And it's also why it works with food so well. So that's what you get used, like you're drinking from that chalice. And you get that with a bottle because these beers are really meant to be served from the bottle, so you can get that high carbonation. Right. And you're seeing a restaurant in Belgium that's really works with.
Although I really enjoy them, I don't typically frame them as a daily drink, as a daily beer, because of the viscosity, a little bit of residual sugar you're talking about, Curtis, or the flavor profile that does lend itself to partner well with food. When I was in Bruges, we, as I mentioned earlier, stopped at this restaurant and had a really awesome rabbit dish. Pardon my slip. We had a great rabbit dish with some, sweet, like figgy raisin sauce and, potatoes and a hearty meal. What struck me is really, I think an American beer, like an IPA or something lighter, would have really gotten lost here. Did you feel that was a lot of how the beers were being received in the American landscape when you first were kind of going down the research for this book? Or was it more like this kind of unique and obscure style that not a lot of people had familiarity with?
Well, if I think about basically the mid 90s, when you had just a few publicans who had been to Belgium, fell in love with these beers, and say, I want to serve these. And it was a challenge because they were imported. They were more expensive to get here. The great thing about them is they were cheap there, but you still had to get them here. Belgian beers were coming to the restaurants at a higher price. They just had to be. There was no way to get them cheaper. And so a lot of people, the few people doing it quite often worked at a lower markup in order to make this work, in order to introduce more people to these beers. And then certainly you have, if you're going to pick one person at the forefront, it's Tom Peters in Philadelphia. And because he would turn over all his lines to Belgian beers. And then he started the restaurant called Monk's, which is still there, which has great food, and the focus is always on the food. Frites just like you get in Belgium, and for a while, and I mean, like in his garage, where he would have to buy the beers in larger amounts and store them in his garage. He and his partner Fergus Carey, they went to Chimay and said, we want to serve your triple, or the white beer, on draft. Also guarantee that they would pour it as a quality product. And then, of course, the years after that, that's now regularly on draft many other places. But it wasn't until they insisted on it.
And Stan, were you just? I got distracted for a second when you said Monks. You're talking about Monks in Boston. Is that what you're talking about?
No, it's in Philadelphia, Monk's Cafe.
Oh, okay, all right, right. Yeah, and then did they end up? So the next thing that leads me for Monks is they have a red. Were they started producing a red and a brown sour, or is that coming from?
And it was done originally as another house beer for Monk's Cafe, and then it got packaged and distributed other places as well.
Right. Well, I'm looking
with
at
the resurgence.
Go ahead, Jason.
So I was going to ask about the draft component that you're talking about with the surgence of appreciation for Abbey ales and Belgian beers. Is there any beer that you feel showcases really well on draft that you prefer versus an imported bottle? Or is there, because you mentioned the carbonation and the styles really being lent to bottle pour and meal service. Is there any beer that you feel is better in one format or the other?
They're all better in the bottle. I'd say, they got the right carbonation. That's what, what they count on. That, but which is not to say that there are places that, like Westmalle, Double on draft. Many the Chimay, they're still nice products, and probably sometimes it would be hard for you to pick between the two. But that's a draft poured at its best, and that's bottle all the time. So
it's interesting that you say that, though, because Curtis, I think you and I have heard over. Me, I think having worked on a draft system, it makes sense too. You may have technicians, or may have not even a technician, may just have an employee who's helping maintain that draft system, and maybe the pressures aren't quite the way they're supposed to be, or the carbonation, for some reason the CO2 tank isn't, full enough to push enough pressure through the system. So having people professionals make the beer, put it in the bottle, and secure it in the format that they feel is best makes sense to me now that you say that out loud.
Well, these beers are fermented in the bottle. That's how they get the carbonation. So you can have a higher level of carbonation. They're also picking up some complexity and nuance during that second fermentation that you're not going to get in a draft beer.
It makes sense. I'm just thinking of the Orval that I'm drinking right now, and it was sitting on a bottom shelf along with probably 6 other ones at Bevmo, and I'm thinking, wonder how long this has been out in the, it's nowhere near any windows or anything else, but I'm like, well, I've got to pull this. This is my choice of the I think the 4 Trappists that they had available, and sometimes I still even today feel that I am at the mercy of whatever establishment is carrying the beer.
Well, that's true.
Curtis starting to gush a little more and get a little more liberated with his words. We're talking with Stan Hieronymus, author of Brew Like a Monk. Stan, you've got some other things coming down the pipe, though. You've got some more publication coming out, more driven towards the bittering agent that is used heavily in making a beer, and that being the hops. Can you tell us a little bit about what's coming down your horizon?
Well, within the next year or two, if they quit cranking out so many new hop varieties, we can say a little bit of the reason people learn about as much of what would be basically a supplement to For the Love of Hops. And that's the nice thing. So Brew Like a Monk comes out in 2005. As I said, I'm perfectly, there are a few things different. Orval would be a difference. Orval is like the year after the book came out, they did change their process a little bit. Instead of adding Brett during the dry hopping in the tank, the bread is actually dosed in line now, which means it has your Orval is more consistent than it was 15 years ago. They know exactly what they'll be getting at whatever, each bottle in there is going to be the same. But there are very few changes, and For the Love of Hops comes out at the end of 2012, and there have just been so many other things discovered about hops, and of course, it only been a few years that IPAs had taken over as the most popular style, and that's just continued to grow from there. So you have many more varieties, and you have many more versions of IPA, and so much more understood about the science of hops. So there's just a whole lot new in the hop world that probably deserves to be written about.
And as you're talking about the IPAs and the hops, and I'm sure that this is similar throughout the United States, but especially here on the West Coast, that there are breweries who they are essentially IPA breweries, and there's a new IPA, there's a new hop, and it's a lot of one and dones the whole way through, and just trying to keep up with it. But and I'm wondering, and this to get your perspective on it, the great hop shortage of a few years ago, where everyone was scrambling to try and figure things out, how have you seen that influence hop buying or the hop usage now?
Well, the first thing, strange as it sounds, when we had what was referred to as hop shortage, was rather short-lived in 2007, 2008. Because of that shortage, which was large breweries around the world needing hops, the people who make immense amount of beers buy lots of hops, even though they produce beers that may not have 10 IBU in them. And some of them a lot more, like in the 20s, like an international lager like Heineken or something like that. When they were caught short, they came in and funded hop growers to put in a lot more infrastructure. And then when there were way too many hops because they funded so much, and the the hops that they were buying are within an acre, they produce a lot more alpha than the hops that are a treasure for their aroma. And that made those acres available when people all of a sudden wanted, first of all, Citra, and then 2012 Mosaic, and so on, El Dorado, Azaka, Kuinat, and all through that process, those acres were there for the expansion. Also happens about that time in 2008 when AB InBev bought, when InBev bought AB, then that opened up even more acres. So it made it easier, made the room, which now, of course, we still have to keep expanding the acres, and that's expensive, but that ball is rolling. As far as people using more, that's if consumers are willing to pay $5 for a 16-ounce can, then brewers can make a profit. They're going to keep pumping in more hops, and at some point it has to stop.
Jason, that makes me think about the supply and demand aspect of that. And we have conversations about hoppy beers, and I mean, I'm still call myself a hop head, and I love hoppy beers and I love hop flavors, and so but I also see that there are some times where it's just bitter water, bitter carbonated water, and I want something that has a malt backbone to balance things out a little bit.
IPA who could go to the homebrew store and buy a pot and some, little kit, decided they were going to open a brewery and make IPAs. And at some point, my palate burnt out, and I started going back into lagers and pilsners and lighter body with a little more nuance. Because to your point, Stan, like there's so many hops out there, I couldn't keep up with what the newest strain was going to be. It got to a point where they were just numbering them. They couldn't even give them a name because it was coming out so fast and furious. And I like the fact that we're discussing, Belgian beers and Abbey beers, because even though I mentioned earlier not wanting one every day, there's something very unique about each one of those Trappist ales that are available, or just a generic domestically brewed Abbey style beer. Lost Abbey being one of them that I really cut my teeth on in terms of being able to enjoy a different flavor profile at a decent price, because there's so many hop forward beers out there. I had to start shifting gears.
Well, and when you're talking about,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, just something real quick off of what Jason was talking about was hops, and I'm wondering about your perspective, Stan, too, on this. Is even now when I go to Bevmo or Total Wine or whatever it is, and I want a Duvel, I can't find Duvel regular. It's the triple hop Duvel, and so it seems like that is now expanding beyond the West Coast appetite, sort of, or the American appetite for hopped up beers. Do you see that happening in Belgium right now?
There is more use of hops in Belgium, and there are people making American influenced IPAs, and this is true in the Czech Republic. It's true in Germany. It's true in Norway. I mean, I was in Norway a couple of years ago, in Poland, and certainly in South America. So you see that American influence, and it is people buy. When I was in Brazil last year, everybody's excited that Sabro, which used to be the homebrew hop, 438, I think, had a name, and people were using it like crazy. And that's a hop that has a lot of coconut if you want to coax it out of it. So people were using it to make pina colada beers that tasted like pina colada. And they were already excited and using a little bit of HBC 692, which is a hop that gets a name in a little more than a month. So and that means it'll be grown at a wider area, so that people are out pursuing the next hop. But then the question becomes, how do they use it? The first thing you do this beer and with Citra, it becomes an all Citra beer. After a while, everything's a Citra beer. You don't have any more difference than when your choices were Budweiser and Miller. If everybody just makes the same beer. But what you're seeing is brewers say, oh, there's this other new variety, or maybe there's an old variety, and you begin to blend them, and you get something unique. Is that where we're going? It is with some brewers, but our consumer is going to be interested, and I think that's the next thing that we figure out, where because hops bring lots of flavors to it, and just as people experiment with different yeast and realize that you can get different character from the yeast, but people flock to what's new. Look at the interest in the Quake yeast from Norway and that region, and everybody said, well, you can ferment it at a much higher temperature and you can ferment it really fast and stuff like that. But part of it's really cool. I'm using this farmhouse yeast that gives me unique flavors.
I'm scrolling through your website. So for anyone who needs to know more about hops, Stan's website and is staying on top of it. I think, do you do once a week? You do an update for hops? Is that correct?
Once a month, there's a newsletter, which went out today, as a matter of fact.
All right. So I'm looking at AppalachianBeer.com, which is Stan's website, and the new lager-friendly hops. And it just reminds me, Jason, of one of our most recent brewery guests, which is there's a brewery out here called Enegren, and they are focused on German-style beers. And we had a great conversation about it, kind of the same way what Jason was talking about is just looking for trying to catch maybe the interest in beers that aren't hop bombs, and to find a nice subtle malt profile and hops flavors. And so as you're reading through these, like, visit the website, take a look at and sign up for the newsletter, first of all, if you're really interested in hops. So I was wondering if you could give a quick synopsis of what a lager-friendly hop, what that means to you.
Well, you're going to think, so if we go back hundreds of years, we can go back 6 million years, and that's when hops began. And then we'll zip to more like 100,000 to 150,000 years ago, and they begin in Mongolia. Some go east, some go west, and they go across the Bering Strait into North America, and that they are a subset of Humulus lupulus that we know as Neo-Mexicanus, and the others we just call Humulus lupulus. And those go into Europe. And that's, when we think about it, we can go back and say, well, by 1300, 1400, those hops had developed their character. And so they're not going to be exactly like Saaz today, but they're going to be like Saaz today, or they're going to be like Mittelfrüh or Hersbrucker. And they have certain characteristics where they're more floral. And part of it, much of it is what they don't have. They have less geraniol, which smells like geranium, obviously, and can be rose-like and floral. And they have less of the thiols, which are eventually leading to the tropical that everybody's in love with. It can also be why you'll get a caddy beer. So any of those landrace hops, from which some people call noble hops, but that's basically a marketing term that became popular in the 80s. But these landrace hops were never bred. They were just naturally selected. And they don't have some of those characters that make American hop special that people like. So, and you can have American hops that were bred so that they also don't have the geraniol. So like a hop like Sterling, for instance, is a wonderful, if you can't get fresh Saaz, you're better off with Sterling. If you can get fresh Saaz, that's great. For instance, here in Atlanta, Halfway Crooks, which is a new brewery, a little over a year old, they were interested in hooking up with some German hop growers. So in other words, they could buy directly from the farm in Germany, put together a big enough order, they could ship a pallet over here, which several breweries around Atlanta have split up. And every brewery that's getting those hops, which are like Mittelfrüh and Hersbrucker, but also Hallertau Blanc, which is bred to be a little bit more like an American hop. Her mother is a Cascade, and she's got that Blanc character, so a little bit like Nelson Sauvin. But the other ones, people, the brewers will smell these hops and they go, "Wow, this is what they're supposed to smell like." They're just more, they've been grown nicely. They're super fresh, and that's part of the hop character that you want in those beers, even if it's something that's going to have, say, 18 IBU in a Helles. There's been a lot of, you see this first rush to lagers has been to make Pilsners, because you can make them hoppy like you do IPAs. And then they became hop driven, and then people start dry hopping. The Germans did dry hop in the 19th century, but that wasn't to add any aroma. That was simply to as a preservative for the beer. So they were not. You can muddle through some of those technical papers, and you see they don't want any more essential oil in there, which is what adds all the aroma and flavor. So a lot of American, the Pilsners that the people coveted, they have lots of hop aroma and flavor, nice hop and aroma and flavor, but it takes out some of the nuance. If you put too much of anything in, it masks the other aromas and flavors. That's we can go back to the Belgian beers. When it's in balance, that's when you get all of the factors. So you can have a Helles that's in balance, and you get that interaction between barley malt from the continent and a German yeast, which is going to have that little bit of sulfur character, and it gives you that aroma and flavor. And if you hop the bejesus out of something, you can't get that because you've masked it away.
Right.
And you're really resonating. I'm really resonating with what you're saying right now, Stan, as we're getting ready to close out our segment today. But dry hop Pilsners have been my jam for the past, I don't know, probably 6 months. But I agree with you that it can be overdone, just like any other IPA or any other style. When those that grain bill and the yeast and the hops are in balance, I think a crisp, really fragrant hop Pilsner is the way to go, especially in these hot summer months. What I like about the Abbey and the Belgian styles that you describe in Brew Like a Monk is kind of that return to a traditional recipe, like we talked about with the German beers as well, like taking just the basic ingredients, coming up with a quality beer based on what the farm ingredients has given you. Curtis, you mentioned Enegren. They're doing some fun stuff, reinventing some styles that they just came out for their 9th anniversary with the Imperial Pilsner Lager coming in at like a 7%, which is big for a lager. But I really appreciate sometimes when a brewery, like these old Belgian breweries, just stick with what they do best and they don't deviate too far away from their core values and recipe. And I think you described some of those recipes and those traditions really well in the book, and I'm really appreciative of you coming on as a guest today.
Thank you.
And so as we get ready to head out, I do want to make one last plug for Stan. So if you go to AppalachianBeer.com, when you click on that, you'll see at the top says buy a book, and there's Brewing Local, Brew for the Love of Hops, Brewing with Wheat, and Brew Like a Monk, which is what we led off with on the show. I failed to mention. I mentioned that I was drinking Orval. Jason, did you have a Belgian beer today, or were you just?
I didn't today. I had to stay light because it's still midday and I've got some other responsibilities. But I do very much plan, Stan, if you want to watch for our posting and recap of this podcast tonight, we're going to be doing a fun little side segment, bringing Joby back into the conversation and recapping this particular interview where I'm going to be indulging in some Belgian beers knowing that I won't have to go anywhere else for the rest of the evening. But yeah, normally I think Chimay is up there for me, Curtis. But there is something so um, I don't know, like celebratory for me of having a good stored West Veteran, and we're running pretty thin on some of those bottles. I know you and I and Joby had some stashed away. So my other go-to is Straf Hendrik for one selfish reasons because my last name really corresponds with the brewery. But there's something really delicious for me about their quad. I love those burnt sugar and stewed dark berry fruit notes that come out with this little hint of spice. And so Straf Hendrik is usually a direction I like to lean.
You're not going to open up the 6-liter St. Bernardus App 12?
Not today, but maybe again, we keep alluding to this, Stan, because I've got this beautiful 6-liter St. Bernardus in a wooden box that was gifted to me from Joby when I left the restaurant. I used to be a GM for him, and it was kind of like a little send-off. We're going to get back after some of these sheltering, restrictions are gone, and after COVID is under the dust and things are settling. We're going to have a big party where we're going to open the St. Bernardus, and you are definitely an invited guest to that celebration, Stan.
And Stan, were you drinking coffee tonight? Is that what I saw you drinking, or did you?
That's water.
Okay. No water in the cups tonight, or no beer in the cup tonight.
No beer in the cup tonight.
It's the Zoom meeting hiding space now. So you tape a tea bag onto your cup, and then you fill it up with wine or beer, and then it just looks like you're sipping.
Curtis,
it's on brand. It should look like I'm drinking beer.
Right.
Well, that's
again,
too funny.
Yeah, Stan, thanks so much for hanging out with us this afternoon. Don't go away.
Check out Stan's website too. Great technical resource. We really appreciate all the technical insight you provide as well. The hops are something that requires guidance, in my opinion. And Stan, you're a great guide in terms of leading us down what's new and what's going to be the right hop selection.
Absolutely. So we're going to go to a break. Stan, don't go anywhere. We'll say goodbye after the break. I'm going to send us in right.
It's refreshment time, and our refreshment stand is loaded with good things to eat. There's crispy, crunchy popcorn, and hot, delicious buttered popcorn, lots of candy, and frosty, refreshing cold drinks. Why not treat yourself at the refreshment center now? As you leave the theater, folks, please be careful. Don't let this happen to your car. Be sure to remove the speaker before you leave. If you should accidentally pull a speaker loose, please turn it in at our snack bar or box office. Thank you.
Hurry, hurry, step right this way, folks, for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, taste-tempting candies of finest quality. Enjoy popcorn, exploded into tender, delicious, crispy bites of crunchy goodness. Enjoy the tops in cool, refreshing soft drinks. If you want to enjoy some refreshments, this is your opportunity. There will now be a short intermission.
10, 9, 8, 7 minutes to go.
Hey, Mom. Yes, you. Why fuss and fret about dinner? Why not have it right here? Yes, this drive-in offers everyone in the family a real picnic treat for dinner. We've got delicious sandwiches with all the trimmings and your other dinner favorites, plus whatever you want to drink, hot or cold. Come early before the show starts, or eat while you're being entertained, or at intermission time. So why fuss? Give your family a tasty dinner at this drive-in.
What is it? Hey, why it's Buttercup. Popcorn, add some butter to hot popcorn. Mix it up, wrap it up, Buttercup is born.
It's delicious.
So nutritious.
It's a taste delight.
It's so munchy,
Crisp and crunchy.
you'll enjoy each bite. Eat butter-drenched Buttercup, popcorn at its best.
Served in a king-size cup.
It beats all the rest.
Show starts in 6 minutes.
Time for refreshment. Refreshment. For your enjoyment, there's hot, fresh popcorn, tempting, delicious hot dogs, and so many kinds of ice cream. And of course, sparkling, delicious, ice-cold Coca-Cola for everybody at the refreshment counter now. Remember, your favorite snack will taste especially good with world-famous ice-cold Coca-Cola.
Well, welcome back to Happy Hour again. Last call. I'm going to, as Jason can't see this, but that last call is the last call logo is just a little big. There we go. Got it sized down so it's not covering up Jason at all.
Last call was feeling like it had a couple of Abbey beers in it.
That's it. It did indeed, and me too. Actually, I mean one. What is this? This is a 375. How big are these? Isn't that the regular size Belgian
Obviously
beer?
big enough for you to be being impacted by the day drinking of Orval.
Yeah, I'm trying to, and I don't even see what the ABV is on it, but it's a good beer. I mean, I've always enjoyed Orval. You know, you were talking. We just finished up with Stan Hieronymus, with author of Brew Like a Monk, among other books. Make sure that you visit his website, AppalachianBeer.com. On top of it, he's a hop expert. So whether you're a Belgian beer lover or just a beer person in general, a lot of good information about hops. But, you know, you were talking about going to Bruges, and I was in Bruges at one point, and I ate in this there was a restaurant at the end of the square, and, you know, where I'm trying to think of the Colin, what's his name? There was a movie where he was sort of this assassin, and then it took place in Bruges. I think it was, I can't remember, but Bruges is in the name, and it doesn't matter. All of it takes place in that courtyard, essentially, where they're supposed to assassinate someone. But at the end of that, there was this, it was an interesting combination of butcher shop and restaurant. And it was it was in the 18th century building, 17th century building of Bruges. It had this industrial chic sort of glass enclosure butcher room with all this dried ham, you know, dried meat aging, and then these long tables. And Stan referenced Kwok. Have you had Kwok before, Jason?
I've seen the brand. I haven't drank it before. I had to look it up just to remember, you know, how I remembered or like how I came to know that brand. So the label is familiar, but no, the beverage doesn't strike a bell for me.
Did you as you're Google searching it, do you see the glass? Because true to Belgian beers, where every Belgian beer, if you're going to a Belgian beer bar, at least, I mean, I don't know about most recently, but there's the I don't know, the mystique of it is that whatever beer they have the glass for it. And so if you order an Orval, you get it in an Orval chalice, and if you order a Chimay or whatever it is, do you see the glass for the Kwok? Do you see the glass for the Kwok at all?
I do. Sorry for that awkward pause. I had to mute myself for a second because the train going by here in Ventura was so aggressive in their horn. But I guess during the daytime, they've got to sound it more frequently than at night when cars are actually come by. Right. I see it. It looks a little bit like an Up Down Sorry game piece without the bass.
So it actually comes
it's very distinct.
It comes with a wooden holder. So it's like a mini when you would see partiers at spring break, when they would have the strap around their neck and the yard of beer or the yard of cocktail, whatever it is. And so the mystique behind it, or the story behind the mythology, I guess, is that the person who created the glass was an avid horseman, equestrian.
Okay.
I guess maybe that's it. And wanted a beer glass that could set in his stirrup. So when he was drinking a beer, he could put it in his stirrup. And so that has this holder that's the size of a stirrup. It has a flat base on it, and you just put it in there. And then
that's funny.
Yeah, I have one. I'll pull it out later for the shows tonight. But I would have to go rummaging through all my glasses. But it's
which you have a plethora of, sir.
Well, I mean, I've gotten rid of a lot
Every
of
great
glasses.
aficionado must have the appropriate glassware to go with the beer, as you said.
I have limited it to just 1 or 2 samples of each glassware because I don't need 15 pint glasses that all have that are the same exact shape and just a different logo.
Well, and I actually get made fun of in the opposite direction because I finally went with all the 13-ounce tulips that we used to use at Barrel House 101. And I use that for everything, including my lagers and pilsners. Instead of having pint glasses, I feel like it still tapers the aroma well enough without, I just use it as universal glass.
Absolutely.
And so in contrast to what you're saying, sometimes I get looks as like, why are you putting a basic light lager into a tulip? I'm like, well, because that just is the glass where I pull out versus rummaging through multiple sets of various shapes. But however you enjoy the beer, just enjoy it.
Yeah, and it makes the beer feel more important that way.
It does. There's nothing like a Coors Banquet in a tulip glass to make you feel fancy.
That's right. Absolutely. So I think this is the end. I feel like if we keep talking, I may open another beer, which I can't do this afternoon. I'll just wait till this evening.
Till tonight. Yeah, this is the end for now for today's show. We will come back tonight with Joby for some fun, random conversation. We'll talk a little bit about our interview with Stan Hieronymus and see what Joby's take is. But you can find that interview coming down the pipe after Curtis does some editing. We're always looking for show ideas or things of interest to you as a listener. So if you want to hear 3 guys behind a mic talk about something random that's important to you, send us your ideas. Or if you just got some favorite beer, spirit, wine that you want us to discuss and try, send over a recommendation.
We'll be happy to take them all. All right.
We'll take them all. And if you happen to have samples laying around that you feel, must be shared as well, especially if you're some kind of producer at home, whether it be a home brewer or home distiller, and you think your stuff's awesome and want us to try it, we'll do it on air. We'll give you a little shout out and see if we can get some buzz surrounding your product.
Right on. Right on. All right. What do we got here? 3:40 in the afternoon. Seems like I got enough